I drove my drunk ex-wife home at 11:47 on a Friday night, and the moment she slid into my back seat in that green dress, with her heels dangling from her hand, my chest caved in. Because 2 years ago I was her husband, and tonight I was just the rideshare driver she didn't know she had called. I'm Caleb Foster, 33. I used to be a marketing director with a glass-walled office, a wife who laughed at my worst jokes, and a little girl who pressed her palm against the window every morning until my car disappeared. But pride took all of it. I lost my job, hid it from the one person who would have stood by me, and let my silence quietly burn our marriage to the ground. And now I drive strangers through the city at midnight just to keep paying for the daughter we share. I almost canceled her ride. I should have. But I couldn't drive away and leave her standing alone on that dark sidewalk, so I got out of the car and watched the past I'd spent 2 years running from climb into my back seat. And when I finally walked her to her door and turned to leave, the old man with the golden retriever stopped me cold, looked at the building she'd just vanished into, then looked back at me, and what he said next made the ground tilt beneath my feet. Because the woman I had failed wasn't just my ex-wife anymore, and on Monday morning I was about to walk straight into her hands. But let me back up. Because to understand why my hands were shaking on that steering wheel, you have to understand what I threw away. It was a Tuesday in October, 3 years ago, when my whole life cracked down the middle. I was sitting at my desk at Meridian Creative when they called 17 of us into a room and handed out envelopes like party favors. I remember the weight of mine. I remember the manager's mouth moving and no sound reaching my ears. I remember walking to the parking garage and sitting in my car for 40 minutes, unable to make my hands turn the key. Because I had a mortgage, a car payment, a daughter named Lily in preschool, and a wife named Natalie, who believed in me more than I had ever believed in myself. I just had to drive home and tell her. I didn't. The next morning, I put on my best shirt. I kissed Natalie on the cheek. I told Lily I loved her, and I watched her press her tiny palm flat against the front window, the way she did every single day, until my car turned the corner and disappeared. Then I drove to a coffee shop downtown, sat in the back, and pretended I still had somewhere to be. I did that for 4 months. 4 months of fake mornings, 4 months of resumes that vanished into silence, 4 months of looking my wife in the eyes over dinner and choosing to lie. I told myself I was protecting her. The truth is, I was protecting my pride, and there is no uglier thing a man can do than dress up his cowardice and call it love. Natalie knew something was wrong. Of course she knew. She noticed how I flinched when she asked about work, how I changed the subject when she mentioned our savings, how I stopped talking about the future like it was a place we were still walking toward together. She asked me twice if something was wrong. Twice, I said no. The truth came out the way truth always does. Quietly, by accident, on an ordinary afternoon. She was looking for the insurance card in the glove box of my car, and instead she found a severance envelope 4 months old. She stood in our driveway holding it for a long time before she came inside. She didn't scream. I almost wish she had. She just looked at me with eyes that were already somewhere far away, and she said, "It's not that you lost your job, Caleb. It's that you looked me in the eyes every single morning and decided I wasn't someone you could trust." I had no answer. Because she was right. We tried counseling. We tried long talks that started gentle and ended in silence. But you cannot patch a hole in the bottom of a boat while you're both still pretending the water isn't rising. The trust I broke wasn't the kind that mends in a season. And one cold Thursday in February, 2 years ago, a judge made it official, and the family I had built with my own 2 hands quietly came apart. Lily was 5. She cried when we explained it to her in small, careful words, and then she asked the question that I will hear in my chest until the day I die. Did I do something wrong? Something broke in me that night that has never fully healed. We agreed to share her weekdays with her mom, weekends with me. Natalie kept the house. I moved into a 1-bedroom apartment 11 minutes away because I refused to be a father who was hard to reach. But the money I had hidden from Natalie didn't vanish when she left. It followed me into that little apartment and sat in the corner like a debt collector who never sleeps. My savings drained away. The job search dragged on with no end. The industry had shifted, and the men competing against me were younger, hungrier, cheaper. So 6 months after the divorce, I signed up to drive rideshare. I told myself it was temporary. 18 months later, I was still doing it. I eventually found a day job at a small logistics company, half the title, 60% of the pay, and I took it, because Lily needed insurance and stability. The rideshare driving covered the gap. Friday nights, Saturday nights, strangers in my back seat, the radio low, my pride packed away in a box I tried very hard not to open. You learn things about yourself. Driving strangers through a sleeping city at midnight. You learn how much of who you thought you were was just the office, the title, the shirt. And you learn that the man underneath all of it is smaller and quieter and more afraid than you ever wanted to admit. That Friday night, I had already done 4 rides. It was 11:47. I told myself, one more, then home, because Lily was sleeping at my apartment and she woke up early and loved making pancakes. The request popped up near the bar district, 3 minutes away. I tapped accept. The name on the screen read, N. Haynes. Haynes was Natalie's maiden name. I saw it for half a second and pushed the thought away. The way you push away things that can't possibly be true. I pulled up in front of a bar called The Lantern. The patio lights glowed soft and gold against the wet pavement. And there, near a planter box, stood a woman with her heels hanging from one hand and her other arm wrapped around herself like she was holding her own ribs together. She looked up, and the entire world stopped breathing. It was Natalie. Her hair was shorter now, cut just below her jaw. She wore a dark green dress and small gold earrings, and even drunk and exhausted and alone on a cold sidewalk, she looked like someone who had survived something and come out stronger. I sat frozen behind the wheel, 3 full seconds, long enough to think about canceling, long enough to remind myself this was the worst possible thing that could happen to either of us. But she was alone. The street was emptying, and she was swaying on her feet. I couldn't drive away. So I opened my door, and I stepped out into the cold, and I walked toward the woman I had failed 2 years ago. The woman who didn't yet know that the man coming to take her home was the same man who had once promised to love her forever. She saw me. Her face moved through 6 different things in 2 seconds. Surprise, recognition, confusion, and finally that careful, composed mask she always wore when she didn't want the world to see what was underneath. "Caleb," she whispered. And right then, I had no idea that this single, accidental ride was about to drag my buried past straight into the middle of my future. "Caleb," she said again, steadier this time, like saying my name twice made it real. "Hey, Nat." We stood there on that wet sidewalk, 2 people who had once shared a bed and a mortgage and a child, now staring at each other like strangers who had wandered into the wrong life. "You're my driver," she said slowly. "Looks like it." She glanced at my car, the same old sedan, a little more tired now, and something flickered behind her eyes. "I can call someone else." "You don't have to do that. I don't want this to be weird, Caleb." "It's already a little weird," I said. "But I can get you home safe, if you let me." She thought about it the way she thought about everything, carefully, like the decision was bigger than it looked. Then she gave one small nod and let me open the back door for her. The smell of her perfume filled the car the second she got in. The same one. 2 years gone, and my body remembered it before my brain did, that warm, soft scent that used to mean home. My hands tightened on the wheel. I pulled away from the curb and into the empty streets, and for almost 5 minutes, neither of us said a word. The streetlights slid across her face in the mirror. Gold, then dark. Gold, then dark. She stared out the window like the city held answers she'd lost a long time ago. Then she spoke, soft and out of nowhere. "Lily made me a card this week." My chest tightened. "I know." She showed me before she glued the glitter on. Used half the bottle. A small, tired laugh escaped her. There's glitter on my refrigerator that will outlive us both. She takes after me, I said before I could stop myself. Commits to a mess and won't let it go. The words landed between us, heavier than I meant them to. Neither of us touched them. She rested her head against the window, and in the mirror, I watched the woman I had failed, and I felt every wrong turn I'd ever made sitting in that car with us, breathing quietly in the dark. You drive a lot of nights? She asked. I could have lied. The old me would have. The old me lied about everything to protect a pride that was worth nothing. Most weekends, I said. It helps cover Lily's things, her school stuff, the little extras. She was quiet for a long moment. You never told me money was that tight. I never told you a lot of things, Nat. That was the whole problem. I saw her eyes lift to the mirror. For 1 second, just one, the mask slipped, and I saw something underneath it that looked almost like grief. Then she looked away. We turned onto her street, and I realized I had never seen where she lived now. A converted brick building with iron balconies and tall windows glowing over a small courtyard. String lights hung between the trees, swaying in the cold wind. It looked warm. It looked like a life she had built without me. I parked near the entrance and got out to open her door. She was steadier now, but the brick sidewalk was uneven, and she wobbled. I walked close beside her, not touching, just close enough to catch her if the ground decided to betray her. At the heavy front door, she punched in a code. Got it wrong? Got it wrong again. On the third try, it clicked open, and she stopped, one hand on the frame, and turned to look at me. In the soft amber light, she looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with the drinks. The kind of tired that lives behind the eyes and never quite leaves. Thank you, she said. You didn't have to stop. I know. She held my gaze a beat too long. Good night, Caleb. Good night, Nat. And she stepped inside, and the heavy door swung shut between us. And just like that, 2 years of distance slammed closed again. I stood there on the sidewalk, doing absolutely nothing useful. My heart was pounding. My hands were still shaking. I told myself to walk to the car, drive home, kiss Lily's sleeping forehead, and pretend this night never happened. I turned to go, and I nearly walked straight into a man and a golden retriever. He was in his 60s, wearing a soft gray cardigan, reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, the dog sitting patient and calm at his side. He had the look of a man who had lived in the same building for 20 years and knew every story it held. He was watching me, not with suspicion, but with something quieter, something careful. You're the ex-husband, he said. It wasn't a question. I blinked. She's mentioned me? She keeps a photo of her little girl on the kitchen windowsill. You're in the background of one of them. I've walked past it 100 times. He held out his hand. Dean Harris, 4th floor. Caleb Foster. I shook it. The dog leaned against my leg. I was just her driver tonight. Coincidence. Dean Harris looked at me for a long, long moment, and slowly his expression changed. Not into pity, into something heavier, like a man deciding whether to hand a stranger a piece of news that would change his whole week. Son, he said gently, do you know what Natalie does now? Where she works? She was at Callaway Design when we were married, I said. I figured she was still there. He shook his head slowly. She left Callaway over a year ago. Built her own firm, brand consulting. Small at first, 1 little room, second-hand furniture. She used to walk that dog past my door at 6 in the morning, phone glued to her ear, fighting for every client she had. My stomach turned cold. 2 months ago, he went on, her company merged with a bigger one, Hartwell and Cross. And 3 weeks ago, the board named her the new chief executive. Her face was on the front of the Business Journal last week. I clipped it. Framed it, actually. The string lights swayed. The dog yawned. And the ground tilted under my feet. Hartwell and Cross. 3 weeks ago, sitting at the wobbly table in my 1-bedroom apartment, I had spent 4 nights rewriting my resume. I had ironed my one good shirt. I had told Lily's stuffed rabbit out loud, because there was nobody else in that apartment to tell, that maybe, just maybe, this was my way back. A senior marketing director position at a growing firm downtown. A firm called Hartwell and Cross. I had applied to my ex-wife's company. I had no idea she ran it. Dean Harris saw the color drain out of my face. He nodded slowly, like a man confirming a diagnosis he'd already feared. "You didn't know," he said. "I applied there," I heard myself whisper, 3 weeks ago, for a job." Dean let out a low breath. The dog looked up at him. "Well," he said quietly, "then I suppose come Monday, that woman you just drove home isn't only your ex-wife anymore." He let the words settle. "She's about to be the one holding your whole future in her hands." I don't remember saying goodbye. I don't remember walking to the car. I only remember sitting behind the wheel, with the engine off, the cold seeping in through the windows, staring at the glowing entrance of a building where the woman I had failed 2 years ago was somewhere upstairs, taking off her gold earrings, having no idea that the man who once lied to her every morning had just applied to work beneath her. The radio stayed off the whole way home. When I got to my apartment, I cracked open Lily's door. She was asleep, with one arm flung over her stuffed rabbit, her mouth slightly open, completely safe in a world that hadn't yet learned how complicated grown-ups make everything. I stood in the doorway and watched her breathe, and I felt the weight of every choice that had brought me here. I had 2 options. I could withdraw the application, disappear from the situation, find another company, another door, another chance that didn't run straight through the heart of everything I had broken. That was the safe choice, the easy choice. Or I could walk into that building on Monday and stand in front of the woman I had failed, humbled, honest, with nothing left to hide behind, and let her see exactly who I had become. I sat on the edge of my bed in the dark for a long time, and somewhere around 3 in the morning, I realized the truth that scared me most. The last time I let my pride make this decision for me, I lost my entire family. Monday morning, I put on my one good shirt, the same one I'd ironed 3 weeks earlier, with so much hope, and I drove downtown and parked across from a glass building that reached 14 floors into a gray sky. I almost didn't get out of the car, but I thought about Lily asking if she had done something wrong. I thought about 4 months of fake mornings. I thought about every time I had let my pride choose for me, and what it had cost. And I got out of the car. The lobby of Hartwell and Cross was all warm light and quiet confidence. I signed in at the front desk with a hand that wouldn't stay steady, and I sat down with my portfolio on my lap, and I waited. The elevator opened. Natalie walked out with a tablet under her arm, and 3 people trailing behind her, all of them scribbling notes. She wore a charcoal blazer, her hair pulled back, and she looked like she had been running companies for 30 years instead of 3 weeks. She saw me at the exact moment I saw her. Everything in her face locked down. The mask came up fast, automatic, professional. She said something low to the people around her, and they peeled away toward a conference room. Then she crossed to the front desk, spoke quietly to the receptionist, and walked away without looking at me once. 20 minutes later, a woman named Sandra Cho came to find me. Kind eyes, careful voice. "Mr. Foster, Ms. Haynes has recused herself entirely from your candidacy," she said, "to avoid any conflict. Your interview today will be conducted by an independent panel. Everything from here is fully separate from her. Is that acceptable?" "Completely," I said. The interview lasted 90 minutes. 3 people asked me about strategy, leadership, crisis management, and I didn't dress anything up. I told them about Meridian. I told them about the mistakes I'd made in my old role, the things I would do differently now. I talked like a man who had been broken open and had finally stopped pretending to be whole. When I left, I didn't know if I had the job. I wasn't even sure I wanted it. They called me Thursday with an offer. I sat in the break room of my logistics job and stared at the wall for 11 minutes. Then I called my father and told him everything. He listened the whole way through, which was rare for him. And when I finished, he said something I've never forgotten. The question isn't whether this is complicated, son. It clearly is. The question is whether you're going to spend the rest of your life choosing what's easy or finally choosing what's right. I accepted the position. The first month was correct and professional and about as comfortable as walking across ice you weren't sure would hold. Natalie ran that company with a sharpness that left no room for excuses. She led meetings in clean, certain words. She never once treated me differently from anyone else on the floor. She also never spoke to me about anything that wasn't work. We co-parented Lily around the edges of all of it. Pickup times, school forms, the small machinery of a child who lived in 2 homes. We were polite. We were careful. We were so careful it was exhausting. Then, one Thursday evening, 6 weeks in, I was alone in the empty office finishing a campaign brief. The cleaning crew hummed somewhere far off, and I heard footsteps. Natalie stood in the doorway, blazer gone, sleeves pushed up, looking at my screen, with the expression she used when she was actually thinking instead of managing. "The garrison brief?" she asked. "First draft." She came closer and pointed at the 3rd section. "That angle is stronger than you're giving it credit for. You buried it. Wasn't sure it fit the brand voice." "It fits, move it up." She straightened. And then she didn't leave. She just stood there a moment and quietly said, "You're good at this. You always were." It was the most human thing she'd said to me since I walked through those doors, and I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Nat," I said. She stopped at the doorway. "I need to say something I should have said 2 years ago. You don't have to answer. You don't have to forgive me. I just need you to hear it." She turned around slowly. "I was ashamed," I said, and my voice cracked on the word. "When I lost that job, I was so ashamed I couldn't even say it out loud. I thought if I admitted I was failing, you'd stop believing in me, and I couldn't survive that. So I lied. Every morning. For 4 months. I took a breath. But hiding it from you was the one thing guaranteed to make it real. I didn't lose your faith when I lost the job. Natalie, I lost it the day I chose my pride over you. And I am sorry. Not because I want anything. Just because you deserved to hear it back when it could have mattered. And I was too much of a coward to say it." The office was very, very quiet. Her eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together hard. "I knew something was wrong," she finally said, her voice low and trembling. "I asked you twice. I kept telling myself if I just waited long enough, you'd trust me enough to tell me the truth." A tear slipped down. "When I found that envelope, I wasn't angry about the money, Caleb. I was destroyed that you looked at me every morning and decided I wasn't someone you could be honest with." "You were exactly that person," I whispered. "The failure was all mine." She didn't answer. She just looked at me for a long, aching moment. Then she said, "I know," and walked out. I didn't sleep that night. But the next morning, there was a coffee on my desk. No note. Just coffee, made exactly the way I'd taken it for 10 years. I looked across the floor toward her office. The blinds were half open. She was on a call, not looking my way. But the coffee was there. And sometimes a second chance doesn't arrive with words. Sometimes it arrives in a paper cup, on a quiet Friday morning, saying everything 2 broken people are still too afraid to say. We didn't rush. That part matters. Every cell in my body wanted to skip ahead to the happy ending. But I had broken this woman's trust by being careless, and I was not going to win it back by being careless again. So we were slow. We started talking, really talking, the way we hadn't in the last year of our marriage. First about Lily, then about work, then about the years in between, not to assign blame, but to finally understand. She told me about building her company from one room with second-hand chairs. I told her about the nights I sat alone in a dark apartment, because the quiet was cheaper than the lights, and gave me more time to count everything I'd lost. We had dinner twice. Both times we told ourselves it was about Lily. Both times we stayed long after the food was gone. 4 months in, Natalie arrived 10 minutes late to Lily's school play, breathless from a client call. I had saved her the seat beside me. She slid in just as our daughter walked on stage, in a crooked papier-mâché crown, gripping it with the most serious face I had ever seen. Lily spotted us, sitting together, side by side, and something crossed her little face that I hadn't seen in 2 years. She smiled so wide her crown slid sideways. When the play ended, she came barreling up the aisle and threw both arms around us at once, and said, "You're both here," like she'd been hoping for it so long she couldn't believe it had come true. Natalie looked at me over our daughter's head. I looked back. And that was the moment we both stopped pretending we were only being careful for professional reasons. We told HR first, then the board. Full disclosure, independent oversight, every protection in place. Because if this was going to work, it had to be honest, all the way down. The thing that destroyed us the first time was hidden truth. We were never going to hide anything again. 1 year after the night I drove her home, on a cool October evening with string lights swaying over the courtyard, I took her hand and led her to the planter box outside her building. "This is where Dean told me," I said. "This is where I found out who you'd become." I reached into my pocket. "I spent 4 months hiding from you because I thought losing a job meant losing your respect. Then I spent 2 years losing everything else, protecting a pride that was worth nothing." I opened the box. "I'm not afraid anymore, Nat, and if you'll let me, I'll spend every single day making sure you never have to wonder if I trust you again." Her hand flew to her mouth. Tears spilled over. "That's a very good apology," she whispered. "It's a proposal." "I know what it is, Caleb. Is that a yes?" She reached out and took the ring from the box herself, so completely her that I almost laughed through the tears, looked at it in the glow of the lights, and said, "Yes." We married the following spring, right there in that courtyard. Dean Harris walked her down the aisle between the potted trees and cried the whole way. Lily was the flower girl and scattered her petals with terrifying precision. My father pulled me aside afterward and told me he was proud, not of the job, not of the recovery, but because I had finally stopped running from hard things. And on the first Friday night of last month, I drove past the lantern, out of pure habit, and I glanced at the spot near the planter box where a woman in a green dress once stood with her heels in her hand. I thought about the 3 seconds I sat there, deciding whether to cancel. I thought about everything that would never have happened if I'd driven away. Because sometimes a whole life turns on a moment so small you almost miss it. A name on a screen. An 11-minute drive. An old man with a golden retriever who knew exactly what he was doing. I didn't drive away that night because she needed someone to stop. That was the only reason. But life doesn't always warn you when it's about to hand back everything you thought you'd lost forever. Sometimes it just sends a notification to your phone at 11:47 on a Friday night. And everything depends on whether you're brave enough to accept the ride. Be honest. If your biggest mistake walked back into your life tomorrow, would you have the courage to say, "I'm sorry," or would your pride win again? Drop a someone if you've ever lost someone because you were too proud to tell them the truth, and a har if you'd fix it today if you could.